All right, I think that we will get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Hallie. I'm a member of the Quad Education team, and I want to welcome you to our webinar on touring colleges, what you need to know. We have two of our fantastic Quad Education consultants here with us today who are going to take us through this topic. For those of you that don't know, Quad Education is an admissions consulting company, and we work with students and families throughout the entire college application process, from choosing classes in high school and extracurriculars all the way through studying for the SAT, the ACT, compiling all the documents that you need for your applications, writing and editing your personal statements, all the way through the day you decide which school that you're going to attend. And so with that, we will get started. So I'll have our consultants introduce themselves in just a minute, and then they will take us through the importance of college tours, how to choose colleges to visit. We'll talk about the things you should look for during your college visit. And then we have quite a few slides on questions that you should ask and think about. We'll talk about factors to consider after you visit each school. And then we'll also talk a little bit about virtual college tours. At the end, we will open things up for a Q&A. So if you have questions throughout this, pop those in the Q&A chat box, and we will definitely get to those at the end. We are also recording this webinar, so you'll be sent a recording of this in an email in a few days, so you can refer back to it if you need it. So we have Dr. Nick and Dominique here with us today. Dr. Nick, can you introduce yourself for us?
Yes. Hello, everybody. So I'm Dr. Nick, based out of Houston, Texas. And my experience is from Vanderbilt, alma mater, where I actually worked as an admissions officer and had a territory. I also was an auxiliary reader for the University of Pennsylvania. I've been with Quad for about 2 years, but also prior to that, I've worked in several distinct high school communities across the United States and served as director of college counseling at all of those. Or not all of those, but at 2 of those, as a matter of fact, 2 or 3. Lastly, and probably most importantly and pertinent to this topic, I was a tour guide for all 4 years in college. So I can definitely tell you, not only from the admissions officer perspective, but having been a tour guide myself and also as a college counselor going on hundreds of college tours across the country to look at and see if it would be a good fit for one of our students. So I've got lots of experience in many different capacities on this topic, and glad you're with us tonight.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Dr. Nick. Excited to hear all of your insider secrets here. Sure. Dominique, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Dominique. I have been with Quad for about 1.5 years, working as an admissions consultant myself. I have experience working through Dartmouth College as an alumni interviewer, interviewing prospective students and giving reports back to the college. I also was a tour guide while I was at Dartmouth. And so definitely have that context for, the types of things that you can and should ask tour guides and like what they might be willing to do for you. And I think it's, a little bit more than maybe what you might expect. So we'll get into that. And I also similarly have some experience working at the high school and middle school level in various different schools, and happy to be here and excited to dive in.
Great. Thanks so much. Excited to have you both. All right. So we have a lot to get through tonight. So let's start with the importance of college tours. Dominique, you want to start us off here?
Absolutely. All right. So just kind of a very basic kind of brief overview of why you should even do this. I think pretty obviously, this just helps you to understand which types of schools will suit you best. And so going on college tours, of course, it is important to visit a lot of the schools that you may think that you may want to go to based on your college list. But I think more than anything, it can just help you understand certain types of schools better. It's not always, intuitive, and it's not something that, we all just grow up knowing. What's the difference between a research university and a liberal arts school? How does a big school compare to a small school? And so that can just be a really good jumping off point for figuring out what you like. Even if you're not able to visit, for example, say Stanford is your dream school, but you live on the East Coast, right? Maybe you're not able to visit Stanford as a 10th or 11th grader, but can you visit a school that's similar to that on the East Coast and get a sense for, well, do I even like this type of school? Do I like a school that's relatively the same size, that has the same types of programs? And then you can sort of get a sense of what's available and what's not. And so definitely start early, because this can just really help you kind of almost understand what you don't know. And then you can dive deeper as you get further on in the process.
Great. Dr. Nick, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I would say, like, as a college counselor, like, one thing I'd like every student to do is visit a liberal arts college. And so that has nothing to do with politics. And even though it says arts, they have wonderful science offerings. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that term, but basically it means that there's very few, if any, grad programs. So basically undergrads get all the research opportunities. So for you STEM students, you know, even though it has arts in the name, they have awesome science offerings. But I'd say if a student can visit a liberal arts college, a mid-sized research university, and that can be, and this definition varies, but roughly between 4 to 8,000-ish kind of area, and then a large, you know, public institution, that'll give you kind of a little bit of three of the most common flavors of college. So what you'll find is that some students are drawn to the bigger places, or places where they get a little bit more attention. But also, like, one thing Dominique was sort of alluding to as well, you may have heard that a school is, you know, world famous and everybody loves it and it's so wonderful and everybody wants to go there. But when you walk around, go with your gut. Because sometimes, like, you'll walk on a campus and go, and I say this as a college counselor all the time, I'd say there's nothing bad about this place. There's nothing that's wrong. I just wouldn't ever apply here myself. But this might be perfect for a student with whom I'm working. And I often tell students, like, the good news is there's lots of places, hundreds of places that you can be happy at, and I would be very happy to have you. The bad news is you got to go find out what those are. So all that to say, like, when I'm working with a student, if they tell me they really like one particular type of school, it's kind of like when you listen to something on iTunes or Spotify or buy something on Amazon. People who like this also like that. So we can kind of give overlap to come up with a sort of a basic idea. I will also tell you that having visited hundreds of these places, and here's also the good news, they're not that different. Like, they have different feels sometimes, they have different policies and whatnot. But, you know, as I've often joked, like, at the end of the day, Papa John's, Domino's, and Pizza Hut all sell pizza. Like, it's kind of very similar. But again, there are important caveats and different programs they might offer. And that's what this whole presentation is about, is exploring kind of what to think about when you're looking at these places.
Awesome. All right. So choosing colleges to visit, I think Dominique mentioned you might not be able to go to all the schools that you want to apply to, but how can you narrow down some choices? And this also really helps thinking about building your college list. If you've already built that or starting to think about that, you can have a column in your spreadsheet for where you want to go visit.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I'll jump in with this one. So kind of three big things here that we want to cover. The first being identifying the criteria that you even want to set, right? And we already kind of talked about this. You know, what type of school do you like? And can we narrow that down to, a few or a list of schools that, you know that you will like for kind of superficial reasons. And then can you go in and see if you truly like the campus and just the feel that you get on campus as well. Researching the university online. There are guidebooks online. Usually, I think nowadays wins out as far as, the resources that you have. Unfortunately, this can be tough. I think that, it can get a little overwhelming scouring college websites and, figuring out what makes all of them different, which is a big point of going on the tour. But if you can at least narrow down based on very, again, superficial characteristics, the size, does it offer the major that you're interested in? Is there, study abroad programs that you're interested in, those kinds of things? Get all of that superficial information and then go to the school itself and then see if you can get a feel for the people and the campus and what that all feels like. And then a big piece here as far as rounding out your college list itself, and something that we do a lot of work with our students that we are counselors for, is really making sure that we balance out that list with reach, match, and safety schools. And so you have some schools that may be a little bit challenging for you to get in, and there's really no guarantee, and it's maybe even unlikely that you'll get in, but you definitely want to try for those. Some schools where you're relatively in the kind of the right area as far as grades, test scores, and then a couple of schools that for sure that you would be happy going to. And I would argue a lot of the time, kind of on the safety school piece, some students just like pick a random school and they're like, well, I'm not going to go there, like whatever, but you may have to go there. So I would argue that's, in some senses, almost the most important tour to go on. Can you pick a school that you have a very good chance of getting into, and may not be your favorite place, but you'll be happy there because you're still going to have to live there for 4 years. So just something to keep in mind as far as, don't write off the safety portion, make sure that you visit those schools too.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. And I would say, I think just to be totally transparent, I think oftentimes families are seeking a ranking or like, if it's prestigious, or I have a student who will say, well, they have a good blank department. And at the end of the day, what you find that first off, the rankings used to sell magazines, they change every year. U.S. News and World Report almost went under at one point. So they were like started to rank things. They rank hospitals and they rank everything. They rank their own rankings. Like, it's just crazy. But anyway, all that to say that often fuels the list. And sometimes that can be like ultra selective places. Everybody wants to go there. It must be good. And so sometimes that eclipses all the important attributes of that institution. So at the end of the day, what we tell students is you want to have a good fit. So if that fit is an ultra selective place, great, but maybe it's not an ultra selective place. And also, there's roughly 4,000 four-year institutions in the United States alone, never mind the international destinations. We have students who sometimes will apply to the UK, Ireland, or Canada, just to name a few. But there's like over 4,000 four-year institutions in the United States. Can you find 3 that you'd like that would absolutely take you or have a very high likelihood of taking you? I will have students every year who they shoot for like really select places and they get it and they're happy. Great. We also have students who end up somewhere they hadn't expected on the front end. And when I check in with them in October, and this is true every single time, they're happy, they have friends. And I often joke the reason for this is high school's terrible. That's why God invented college. So basically, college is really fun kind of wherever you go. And so I've had that experience, and that can be really hard when you're in the thick of things and you're hearing all the stuff from neighbors or reading stuff online, or I'm getting a lot of students reporting intel from TikTok, which I find curious. But anyway, all that to say, like, it's a really overwhelming time. And that's one thing that we work with our students is try to make sure that's as stress-free as possible. But again, having a balanced list is good. The last thing I'll say is with the ultra selective places, sometimes I'll say, that's going to be a reach. And I cannot tell you, I wish I had a nickel for every time a family said, well, we know it's hard, but just to see. You never know. It's like the lottery, just to see. And that's not always the most informed approach. So again, what we try to do is make sure that every student has a balanced list of places that they would thrive and grow.
All right. Those are all some great tips. And if you need more help on building your college list, we do have some webinars up on our site that cover that in much more depth. All right, so what should you be looking for during your college visit?
So I would say the first thing is parking, probably, but after that, parking is always a conundrum, especially at the more urban campuses. So I always ask the tour guide, like, what would you change about this place? And parking something typically comes up. But look at the campus facilities and resources. Oftentimes, they'll show off a new art center, or science center, or career center. I mean, anything that a university can build. They very well might show off their new wares. And that's a great time to also like see what students are researching. Like, campuses are full with bulletin boards of different, like if you go to a science department, you'll see different research and different papers. But also, if you were a student there, these are the things you could avail yourself of. So in other words, you're kind of building your sort of like, resume for when you complete your bachelor's degree, whether you want to go to grad school or the job market directly. You've got that stuff kind of under your belt, so that's one thing. It's like taking advantage not just of what's on campus, but also in the surrounding environs. With the admissions officers, like oftentimes they will be, in the office. If it's during the fall, they very well might be doing fall travel season. So I'm sure Dominique would agree that, I was on the road 6 to 8 weeks every, pretty much every fall. So I actually realized I've spent a year of my life in Marriott hotel rooms. So anyway, as long as they're not on the road, if they're right there, they're happy to meet with you. And I can tell you, and I'm sure Dominique would also share this experience, it can be really scary because, like, oh my God, they're the one reading my file. I hope they like me. What I used to say in my territory is I work for 2 entities. I work for the university, and I've got things I got to look for that. But I also work for you. I'm your voice in committee. So don't be afraid of them. I know it's like nerve wracking. And the average age of the profession is roughly 27. So it's not your grandmother. It's more like a big sister, a big brother who you're meeting with. But also, I think some of the best things, you'll find that the tours kind of blend together a little bit over a while. Like, everyone has the blue light emergency phone. Here's the card to get into the dining hall, but it's also your dorm. Just all that kind of stuff. But talk to current students. And this is also a great thing. Sometimes offices will have shadow a student for a day. So they take you to class, they take you to the dining hall, they take you to the lecture, they take you to the basketball game. Some places will do an overnight. Some universities are very aware of that. However, you got a cousin or an older sibling or someone who, let's say you were on the same varsity team or other activity in high school, and they graduated the year before you are, and they're there. If they want to host you for a weekend, that's fine. Just go around. And that's probably the most real way to experience it, because you're test driving it. So I can tell you all about how great this car is, but until you get in the driver's seat yourself, you're not going to know if it's really what you're looking for. So.
Yeah, I would also just jump in just to kind of echo just like the meeting with people piece. So I was never an admissions officer, but just being like an alumni interviewer and being able to talk to students, I know that that's such a high stress thing for students, because yes, it is the interview, but I did this basically right after I graduated. I wasn't so different from these students, right? And so even if it's not your alumni interviewer, can you find and connect with young alumni that are willing to talk to you? There's a million ways to do this. You can go on LinkedIn, you can, network through your schools. I'm sure, if you were looking at more local schools, you could ask some of your teachers or just, mentors that you have. Do you know anyone who went to this school, that school? Don't be afraid to just ask around and network. And then just from my tour guide experience, I used to love talking to students, just prospective students, about everything I was involved in. And so if, they pulled me aside after and just said, tell me more about your dorm, or what do you do for fun, and just a little bit more informal conversation, I was always happy to do it, and also happy to connect them with my friends, right? So I was pre-med, and sometimes I would have kids come up to me and be like, you talked a lot about your experience being pre-med, but like, I want to be an English major. Is there anyone I can talk to, right? And I had friends and I had connections. The tour guides are just students there, and they're happy to put you in touch with these people. If not just an email, like potentially you could meet up with them and have lunch with them. Usually I would say, students are pretty excited to show up their school. And if they're not, maybe take that into account as to, maybe this is a place that you may not want to go for that reason or whatever it may be. So just don't be afraid to talk to people. That's how you're going to get the most real account. The materials that the admissions office put out, they're great, but that's the kind of stuff that gets blurred together. Really having that conversation, that connection with someone who went there and can speak to the programs, to the school, to their experience, can really help paint a picture that you just cannot get online, or I would argue even from like the very scripted out tour itself.
That brings up a great question that I think, a lot of people wonder, but both of you having been tour guides, how real are the tour guides in their excitement for the school in general? I'm sure there's, the odd one out, but are they actually like really excited about the school and showing it to you because they really care? Or is it very much like another piece of sales material?
No, I think it's definitely, I can tell you as someone who was a tour guide and trained tour guides, and, we would, I guess, hire tour. I think we gave them $10 a tour. It wasn't like a big gig, but just something that they would do. But they definitely love their school. They definitely can talk to it. And we try to have a variety of different personalities and regions and whatnot. And actually, one thing you can also do, especially is something that since COVID, a lot of offices will have like current students you can talk to, and they'll be like, this is Jake from Seattle and he's studying engineering, and you can like set up a meeting with Jake. Many of them are tour guides too. I will say, like, I don't really feel like it's sort of like a sales job. What I sometimes, and this is just me being a former tour guide myself, sometimes I feel like they're not answering the question, or they're saying things that are not actually the case. And they're very minor things that most families will know, but they'll say, we're the only college in the country to require a senior thesis before they graduate. No, there's lots of places that do that. So you'll hear things that is like they have some exclusivity on, but I go, no, there's other places that have. Not a bad thing, but it's also not that. They all make an allusion to Harry Potter. I don't know why, but everything's something Harry Potter. There's Quidditch. I was even on a tour with the students at the high school I worked with, and so I was like chaperoning the men or the boys rather, and then like the female tour or the female chaperones were with the girls, and we were touring Syracuse, and then I had said like they're going to say something about Harry Potter within 10 minutes, and literally they pointed to some building like, yeah, it looks like Hogwarts, and all the boys looked at me, and I just went, and they just kind of clapped, and because they had known the whole thing. So I would say that, but sometimes like I had one tour guide, I remember she kept saying, this may look like this, but actually, and she kept saying actually, like everything was actually. But aside from that, like they're going to give you like, you know, the good stuff and all that. And of course, they are trained to give a positive spin, you know, so we would always say like, do you like the food? What if you don't like the food? Well, you know, I don't really like the food. I kind of have my own special diet. But my friends really like, you know, Taco Tuesday. Awesome. You know, so you can do that.
Yeah, I would say just, you know, it definitely, as far as it being like a sales thing, it is absolutely, there was really little to no financial incentive from my experience. But like we got paid some, but it wasn't like, wow, this is great money, I'm going to go out and sell, right? Like it wasn't anything like that. So it was, we really were doing it because we were excited, and it was relatively competitive. Like these are the people on campus that are like super excited to talk about their school. And that's something to keep in mind as well, right? Every school is going to have that small group of people that really love it, right? Which all the more reason to branch out. The tour guides are great. And you know, they can give you a lot of valuable information, and a lot of it is very much scripted, and rightfully so. It's just like pure facts and information. And so being able to speak with other students, and, you know, again, alumni, and just hear as many perspectives as you can, that isn't just that subset of students that are just so gung-ho to go, you know, show off their school, that can give you a really full and clear picture in addition to the tour and the online research and everything else.
Fantastic. All right. So let's talk about questions to ask on your tour. So we have quite a few slides with a lot of questions. So I think we'll maybe pull a couple out from each slide and talk about why asking questions within this category is beneficial to you, and how it relates back to your, you know, building a college list.
Awesome. So this first slide is about admissions specifically. So what it takes to get into that school. I think, you know, I'll let you all read through these, like Hallie said. One that really stands out to me that is important is number 2. Do you consider demonstrated interest in the admissions process? This really does vary from school to school. Essentially what this means is, will a school kind of rate you more favorably or look at you in a better light because you have signed up for their email list, or you have shown up to the tour and they're like, oh, great, they really are interested. You know, that's going to go in their file and that's going to be part of this. That is certainly the case at some schools, not all. What I will say about that is, I guess, you know, also ask, that's not on here, but semi-related, ask about the early acceptance policies, because that really can vary from school to school. And I'm talking specifically about like early decision versus early action versus restrictive early action, which can be like, you know, a little bit hairy. Sometimes, usually it's pretty cut and dry, but all of that to say, that's kind of lumped in with demonstrated interest, in my opinion. And being able to apply to a school and say like, hey, this is definitely my first choice versus I'm just applying early or whatever it may be. So really making sure you're super clear on what that school's early policy is, also plays into that. And then another big one I would say that can vary from school to school that you should be very clear on is the interview process. It is common, like I said, I was an alumni interviewer. It is common to see schools that have just alums sign up, and that was a completely volunteer position. I was not paid by the school. I was not out, again, like selling in any way. It was truly just, can you go out and do either like a virtual or in-person interview with any prospective students? You were assigned the students, and then you would like submit a formal report, which is very different than showing up to campus or hopping on Zoom with an admissions officer. It's just kind of a different vibe and feeling. Importantly, right, be very clear on if an interview is required or not. One thing that I just remember so distinctly from my high school experience is, you know, not everybody was offered an interview, including me. Dartmouth was my first choice, and I was so excited. And other kids that were applying at my high school had gotten interviews, and I didn't, which like really made me super nervous. And I was one of the only students who got in. So there were other students that did get interviews that did not get in. So don't use that if the interview is not required, which it usually isn't. Just make sure that you're very clear on that, because that can like lead to some psychological distress when you either are or not. So just make sure you know kind of upfront what all of that looks like as well. And then, you know, the other ones, letters of recommendation is relatively I would say, standard from school to school. That definitely, like, each of them will accept a different number of letters of rec. So there's some strategy there. Definitely be clear on that. You can look that up online. Same thing with acceptance rate. And then the test optional policy, I would say there can sometimes be exceptions depending on if you're like applying to a specific program that really wants to see a strong test score in math or reading or whatever it may be. So that's something to be clear on if you're applying to a specific program or not.
Yeah, as I'm looking at this slide, I'm thinking about my favorite answer to any question about the college process. It depends. So you're going to see like there's a lot of different variables here, and one place might do it differently, another place. I would actually direct these questions more towards the admissions officer. I can say working with tour guides I would trust to answer these accurately, and there's tour guides who I would not necessarily expect them to know this. So these are more admissions officer ones. Demonstrated interest is one of the most impossible things to explain because not every place does it, and not every place does it in the same capacity. Generally speaking, the more selective a school is, the less likely they are to care. So you could visit like, a Yale or something, and 10,000 times it's not going to matter. Now, there are places, though, that care about it tremendously, and I don't ever want to use names, but we'll call them Wake Forest and Tulane, that really care about demonstrated interest, but also other places care about in context. So I'm 2 miles down the street from Rice University. The high school I worked at was 4 miles up the road from there. Rice expected Houston students who are in the area just come up on campus one time, but a student from Northern Alaska, they're probably less likely to. So a couple things here. If a college says they don't track demonstrated interest, they do not track demonstrated interest. It's not a trick or anything like that. And also with the interviews, like to adult ears and parent ears, this sounds like a job interview. And it really kind of isn't. As Dominique had talked about, it's really more of a conversation. And when we implemented the Vanderbilt alumni interview program, I was like doing as one of my little grad student tasks at the time. But basically, it was really more to keep the alums connected. So like, Dominique said, she was interviewing them right out of undergrad, and so like she's, just 21, 22. It's a way for young alums to give back and be connected to the institution without necessarily opening up their pocketbook. So it kind of shows them that. And an alum, by definition, can be 21 to 100. Just never know kind of what they're going to get. But more often than not, like they're typically 20-somethings, or they might be parents that have younger children, or parents that have children that are maybe like in 9th grade and you're in 12th grade. So that kind of thing. But yeah, these are all great things to consider as you move forward.
Fantastic. All right. So academics.
Yeah, so this is a great question for any number of students, no matter what background you come from. I definitely recruited at high schools that were big, Pennsylvania-sized publics or Texas-sized publics with, over 1,000 students in a class. I went to a little itty-bitty school in New England called Cape Cod Academy on Cape Cod with 33 kids in my class. Yes, 33 kids. So it was very small. So anyway, all that to say, I was used to that sort of attention. And I know when I've gone to like, these big campuses like a UCLA, I'm like, oh my God, it's a sea of Californians. So all that to say, like, you just got to figure out kind of what that looks like. Sometimes the student faculty ratio, like I'd say, don't be splitting hairs. Like I had a student one time, he's like, this one's 8-1, but this one's 9-1. I'm like, dude, you're not going to notice that. If it's 1-99, sure. So anyway, some places have online courses, some have hybrid. It's a great thing to ask your tour guide, see what that out there. How many classes do students take a semester? This can vary, but typically it's 5. And there's a term called credit hours. So it changes a little bit different. Again, it depends, but for the most part, 5 credit hours. So if each class is typically worth 3 credit hours. So what that means is you're in class 3 hours a week. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday for an hour, or Tuesday, Thursday for an hour and a half. And then you'll get 3 credits towards your bachelor degree of 120. So, if you think about it, in like 2 days of high school, you're basically there about 15 hours. That's your entire academic schedule in college. So when you hear college students say, I'm so busy, you actually have way more time than you did in high school. But that's exactly when you should use things to not only have fun, of course have fun, but like take a course you'd never thought about before. There's all different clubs that you've never necessarily had available at your high school that you can join. There's like skiing clubs. There's clubs that go outdoors. There's clubs that volunteer in the community. There's clubs that work with a number of students or elderly people. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there. So definitely take advantage of that. Are classes more theatrical or hands-on? I think that'll depend on the major, but certainly ask the tour guide about their experience. And with the switching majors, like, again, get clarity on this. Generally speaking, unless you're switching in like late junior year or senior year, it's not a problem, and it's not going to take you longer to graduate. So if you like decide second semester or freshman year, I was thinking this, I want to do that, probably okay. Again, it's going to depend. So that's a good thing to ask.
One thing I think that was all great, and I don't have a ton more to add. One thing, just like super specific, on the how many classes do students take a semester, I think this is just like a general thing that I didn't know until I literally started college that I think y'all should know. Sometimes colleges don't even use semesters. They'll either do like a trimester or a quarter, which can drastically change the experience. Mm-hmm. I got lucky that Dartmouth used trimesters, and I really didn't know about that when I was applying, and I'm glad it worked out. But in my case, we had 3 10-week terms where we took 3 classes per term, as opposed to 2 15-week semesters where you take 5 to 6. And so in that case, for me, it was like very intense because it was a short 10-week block, but it was only 3 classes. So it was very intense, and each class was very fast paced, but it was only 3 subjects at once to focus on, as opposed to 5 that are drawn out a little longer. And so that actually, really, really, if you think about it, that totally changes the experience. For some people, that's awesome. It's like, I love it. I'm going to focus in really deep, get this done in 10 weeks, and then move on to the next thing. Some people would prefer that more traditional semester kind of setup. And so definitely get clarity on that, because it'll just really affect your day-to-day. It's definitely a big piece of the academic life.
Awesome. Yeah, that's definitely a great tip. And then I think just want to add, with majors or schools within the university, as Dr. Nick said, generally a pretty easy thing to do, especially if you're earlier on in the process. But if you are applying to a special school or program within a university that you have to apply to special, it might make things a little bit more complicated. So just be aware of that. It's more of if you're applying to like a very selective program or trying to transfer into one where you might run into some issues. All right, questions about academic support.
All right, awesome. So yeah, academic support in college, I'm sure a lot of you already heard this. It is almost entirely up to you to figure out what support you need and seek it out. There is a ton of resources on campus, but it's just starkly different to high school, where you are in a relatively small class and you have a teacher that's basically keeping tabs on you and like making sure that they're checking in with you at least from time to time. And so at some schools, that is still the norm, and you'll still be taking a relatively small like seminar style class where you have 20, 15 students sitting around a table having a discussion. You'll get to know your professor really well. In other situations, either at a large school or even, I went at Dartmouth, it was a very small school, but I was in a big program. Being pre-med, I'm sitting in, a lecture hall of 100 students taking intro chemistry. My professor sure as heck is not going to know my name unless I make sure I'm at office hours every week and I'm taking advantage of all the opportunities. And so that's just a general thing to understand. And that really goes along with student teacher ratio and just the difference between departments and the nature of the classes. But on the whole, it's a lot more kind of on you to figure out what support you need and get it. And so it's very important to walk out feeling clarity about, will I have an advisor? Is there a tutoring center I can go to? Is there, if you're thinking about more of a humanities major, is there a writing center I can go to? Or, just a place where I can get help with that? What does all of that look like? That way, kind of exactly how to navigate that when you get there. And then number 5 is, won't apply to everybody, but is huge and incredibly important. Spoken as a former special education teacher, know if you have an IEP or a 504 or something in high school where you have some sort of documented disability and accommodations, make sure you know what they're able to do with that on the college level ahead of time, because definitely it varies from school to school. Almost every school will have a center for students with disabilities, but you're definitely going to want to make sure you just triple check, bring your documentation. That way, there's no questions or ambiguity, because again, it's not, those types of accommodations are not quite as guaranteed as they might be to you in high school. And so you really do have to advocate for them and make sure that you have done your due diligence in knowing the lay of the land and how it all works.
If your tour guide doesn't necessarily know the answers to some of these questions, can you generally talk to the Disability Services Center or an admissions counselor or someone else on campus that has more information about this while you are there visiting?
Yeah, I would say almost 100% of the time, yes. From my experience, if somebody asked me about like the tutoring center or whatever, the Office for Disabilities, I would just walk them right over. Almost everything was located in the library, and I know that they'd be happy to talk to a prospective family. Like, and again, that's just my experience. It may not be true on every single campus, depending on security and, the comfort level of the tour guide, but there's a good chance that they'll just be like, yeah, let me bring you over and you can talk to the staff there or whatever it may be. So definitely err on the side of at least trying and asking. And it doesn't hurt. And if you have to like get a phone number or an email instead, that's still good.
Great. Dr. Nick, anything else here?
No, I would definitely agree. And I'll say your tour guide very well may not know about this. In terms of like, if you have, any sort of like learning differences but they very well might know about writing centers. Oftentimes they also will have an academic advisor in your major. So I was a history and anthropology major. I had different advisors for both in their respective departments. So there's definitely things, and sometimes they even do like sort of like a peer tutoring kind of thing. So one of your friends you can just do this informally. If someone's really good at a class you're taking together, study together. But anyway, there's definitely like lots of places where you can get help if you require it.
All right, financial aid.
Yeah, so this is going to vary from school to school, but basically there's need-based financial aid that meets need, and then there's merit-based financial aid, which is basically scholarship. So you have an attribute that they like, or you're really academically talented. Sometimes it can be as simple as a high test score. It kind of depends. Some places give lots and lots of merit scholarships. Some don't give any. Some give lots and lots of financial aid. Some they don't necessarily have as much. A lot of times, though, I think when families are looking at colleges, they'll often ask, and I remember at college fairs, they would ask me all the time, what's the tuition? Well, the tuition is a big piece of the pie, but you want the whole pie. So you always want to ask, what's the total cost of attendance? Room and board, books. This may surprise you. For whether you're thinking about studying literature and philosophy, or if you're studying biomedical engineering, students be prepared to spend between, on the low end, about $500, on the high end to over $2,000 for your books every semester. And that's just kind of fun. Now there's some things where you can buy used books and they have some electronic version that can save it, but like that's another consideration. But housing, there's sometimes an activities fee which pays for like the rec center and that kind of thing. But what I would say is that sticker price, so the total cost of attendance at the college might be, let's just say $65,000. That's a lot of money. But that said, those places also tend to have very generous financial aid. So a lot of the places that have really big endowments, which tend to be the more selective places, they'll have this program called no loan. So what they'll say is when a student applies for financial aid, it's going to spit out a number called an expected family contribution. So that's what they expect the family to contribute. So if it was, say, $65,000 a year, if your EFC was $15,000, you would be expected to come up with the $15,000 through savings or cash or like student loans or what have you. Sometimes it's a work study, you have a job on campus that kind of helps that. But the other $50,000, if they're no loan and meet 100% of demonstrated need, they're going to take care of that, and that's free money, you don't have to pay back. So oftentimes that sticker price is not what you're paying, so don't write off a school for that. Parents, what I'll say is, if you even before your child has applied to a university, you are always welcome to call the financial aid office. It will, most offices are need blind. So in other words, we in admissions never said, well, can they pay the bill or whatever? Once we admitted them, it would go to financial aid if they had applied for it, and they would work it out. But they can give you a rough idea as to kind of what you can expect if you call them up. Oftentimes, with outside scholarships, often called portable scholarships. So if you get a scholarship from, a company, or sometimes it's where the parents work, or sometimes you enter, the Duracell Battery Energizer Challenge essay, like whatever it is, that stuff more often than not, financial aid offices will put that towards anything that's not free money to you. So they're going to give you the best possible deal in the vast majority of cases. But these are all great questions that you can ask the financial aid office. And in terms of scholarships, the admissions officers can also assist with those as well.
Yeah, this is all great information. I think financial aid is so tough to navigate. And so, again, don't be afraid to call and just have a conversation and get to know what the policies are at each school. Just, again, a little bit of a personal anecdote, but something I think is just so important to tell everyone. Don't be afraid, very similar to what Dr. Nick said, don't be afraid of big name schools because you feel like you can't afford them. I would almost argue, especially like if you are a 9th grader, a 10th grader, and you still have time, like shoot for that. Because those will be the schools that will actually be most easy to afford in the long run. So oftentimes the elite, more selective schools, private schools that have large endowments will have some sort of program where they are like, they're basically giving all need-based financial aid. And usually you can get almost free tuition, if not everything covered, if you're like below some sort of family threshold. I was very surprised when I applied. And I know it's changed over the years. I actually just looked it up. So for Dartmouth, for example, it's $125,000. So if your family makes less than that cutoff, you are guaranteed free tuition, which that's not a super, super low number. That's definitely like kind of an average family income. And so don't feel like, oh man, I'm not, I don't have all the money in the world. I could never go to a Harvard or a Dartmouth. Like you very much can. And it might be even easier for you to go to a school like that if you can get in, of course, right? Which is like more than half of the battle. But definitely don't think, oh, I could never go to a school like that because I simply don't have the money. It almost, gives a little bit more incentive if you are around that kind of income level to really work hard for it and see what you can do, because it will pay off in the end, because they will have the biggest endowment and be usually the most generous with financial aid.
Fantastic. All right. So we have a handful more slides here. So we're going to go through some of these, but are also going to be mindful of time. So we have enough time to answer your questions at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is a great question to ask. A lot of times you'll have a freshman orientation. You'll have a group, and some of them will become your best friends. Some of them you see around campus, and some you don't. You just see every now and then. But anyway, that's often a way to do it. There's often a lot of sometimes they have online, and they've done it through social media before and whatnot. You can connect with different students who have also been enrolled or have also decided to enroll, and some students even find their roommate that way. But, this is a great question to ask the tour guide. How did you find your friend group? How did you, figure that out? They'll often have an activities fair in the beginning of the fall. So for most universities that open in August, it's usually the second week of September. You'll see there's hundreds of clubs. As a freshman, you're going to sign up for 20 of them. You're probably going to really devote yourself to about 3 or 4. And it just kind of depends on what you'd like to do. But yeah, by all means, ask them what the student life is like. What are some of the main events or traditions? We had an annual, sort of mini music festival at Vanderbilt called Rites of Spring. And that was something we did every spring. But there's other stuff out there depending on where you are and also how large the school is. I've had a couple of schools that they throw you in the fountain on your birthday. I mean, maybe that's your thing, maybe that's not, but these are things that are good to ask. So.
One just quick thing. I know that I've been incredibly long-winded this whole time and now we're running out of time, but very quickly, another thing I would say to ask, and don't be shy about asking this, is what does just a regular Friday night look like, right? And this can be so different for so many students, but there are some schools where the social scene, especially on a more rural campus, for example, Dartmouth, right, where the social scene really is very, there's one thing to do, right? It's really just a big kind of Greek fraternity scene, right? And if you're not aware of that, and if that's not something you're interested in, that can really change things for you. And so don't be afraid to ask about, parties and drinking and that kind of culture. The tour guide will give you a very canned answer, of course. But again, don't be afraid to connect with actual students and just ask them those honest questions, because, it does happen on every college campus. And of course, no admissions office is going to say, yeah, we have the craziest frat parties. And, the only thing to do here is Greek life. But sometimes that is just a reality where the majority of the campus is involved in something like that. And it's important to understand what that looks like, because that truly is, most of the time you're going to be living on campus and it's going to be your life for 4 years. And so make sure you understand very well the academic programs, but also how is all the rest of that time going to be spent? Make sure it's a place that you can truly see yourself living and thriving and fitting in, not just going because they have a great biology program or whatever it may be.
Fantastic. All right. So stemming off of that, campus housing and community.
So I've seen three types of dorms when I visit college campuses. I see standard issue, I see prison cell, and I see palace. So basically, one thing I've noticed is that college campuses have really become more competitive about their housing options. And there are some places that are nicer than most apartments I've lived in. And there's other places that just sort of your standard issue dorm, dormitory or residence hall. But a lot of times they've been doing living learning communities. Sometimes they have single rooms, double rooms, triple. Oftentimes they even might have a setup where everyone has a single room, but there's so there might be 4 singles, but everyone's got a common bathroom, kitchen, and living room. That's kind of cool. At Vanderbilt, we had what were called Mayfields. So these were like 10-person houses. Everybody had their own room. It was 2 stories, and they could, share like all the other facilities. So you had basically a house with like 9 of your friends. It just depends, and oftentimes some places have fancy laundry services that do your laundry for you, but you should learn to do your laundry before you go to college. But also what do they say about living and dining campus? Sometimes a lot of the students will be living off campus. Some will be living on. There's all sorts of reasons for that. But just the most important takeaway from the slide is just to see what is out there and what sort of, situations you might have or options, I should say, in terms of housing and what's available. And also, the moms always ask about security. So, but I think it almost goes without saying. But by all means, student safety at every campus is every administration's top priority. But if you want clarity on that, they often will tell you all the protocols and procedures. So,
yeah, I would echo all of that. I won't, just for the sake of time, I won't jump in with too much more. But I think the gist of all of this is just like that a sense of what is available. There's just so much that's so different. Again, this is your life for 4 years. And so it may seem like, well, I don't really care. I just want to make sure I go to the best school possible and the best program, whatever. But you really need to care because you're going to literally be living there and sleeping there every night. So just make sure you do your due diligence with this and don't just throw it aside and say, I guess I'll be happy regardless.
Absolutely. All right. Work and research opportunities.
I can jump in with this one. So this is, somewhat specific to maybe students who definitely know that they either want to work or do research on campus. Some schools are much better set up to facilitate and really prioritize undergraduate research as opposed to really kind of having those be more geared towards graduate students. And so definitely ask that question. What opportunities are there? What formal programs are there for me to get involved with research in a lab or whatever it may be? And then, you can, again, I would just say ask students, talk to students. Do you work on campus? What do you do? What does that look like? There's just a huge variety on every campus of different types of jobs. So just getting a sense of what that may be is important. I think even more important would be to figure out the internship kind of structure. Something that really surprised me about Dartmouth, and I'm sure a lot of other schools have, is that they have funding and scholarships available for you to literally go off for a semester or the summer and do some sort of work, whether it is volunteer work or research or an internship, right? And so it's not always, it either needs to be I'm serving food at the cafeteria to earn my money, right? You can still do something that's academically enriching or research based or something like that may usually be unpaid or free. And there's funding that you can apply for to do that. And so, yes, there are your standard jobs. You get a paycheck every week for doing, some sort of work, and that's meaningful and that's valuable. But there's also, maybe things that you potentially feel again, this is the way I felt like, oh, well, I couldn't do that. I have to spend my summer, working my usual supermarket job. I could never do research, or I could never volunteer for the summer because I need to be earning money. That is not always the case. And so definitely ask about how you can apply for funding and what kinds of things are available in that sense.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue to our next slide. So this is something I pay really close attention to as a college counselor. I've been going on all of these. So I know the reputation of this program or the prestige associated with the place, or they're really famous for this or famous for that. But I'm looking at student outcomes because basically I tell students all the time, when you graduate, there's two names in your diploma. One is the college you went to and one is yours. The second one has way more impact. It's what you did with that first name that's going to really matter. So I'm looking to see like how many students, continue their education afterward. As a matter of fact, this is a fun statistic. I don't know if this is the case currently, but for many years, Reed College in Portland, Oregon, if you wanted your child or as a student, if you wanted to go to the place where that was going to get you excited about learning and you were the most likely to pursue a PhD, Reed College in Portland, Oregon. It's not Yale or anywhere, it was there. So like that just kind of gives you an idea. In terms of graduation, oftentimes, and this is a weird thing, but in higher ed, oftentimes they'll give you the 6-year graduation rate. Most students graduate in 4. There's obviously reasons of all different types of reasons why they may not graduate in 4 years, or they take a leave of absence or anything like that. The vast majority of students are graduating within 4 years, but it's also good to get an idea kind of what that looks like. We talked a little bit about financial aid. You can also get that's a great question to ask the financial aid office is what's the average debt load. They can give you a rough figure. And also career services is something I really look at. I want to see them preparing. So that's the biggest question. One of the biggest questions I have is, like, as a college counselor, I want to know what type of student would fit in, what type of student wouldn't, what's the best thing, what would you change, which is a polite way of saying what don't you like, and then lastly, what are you doing to prepare students for the next step? So that last one is more important to me than the perceived reputation of the place.
All right.
Yeah, I don't have much more for this one. I know we want to save time for questions, so I'll just.
Yeah, if you have more questions on this, pop them in the chat and we can answer them specifically. All right, so we'll go over a couple factors to consider after your visit, and then we'll quickly talk about virtual tours, and then we'll answer some Q&A questions.
So this is just like a very brief kind of summary takeaway slide. So all of these bullet points is basically everything that we just discussed. Again, I would just underscore the importance of truly your impression. Do not get hung up on the rankings. Do not get hung up on, well, this has always been my dream school. Well, okay, but maybe it's been your dream school since you were 10 years old and you had no idea what you wanted when you were 10 years old, right? Which, not speaking from experience or anything, but that's like a real thing, right? And so just, keep that in mind. Will you be happy here? Can you live here? Can you eat here? Can you see yourself going out on a Friday night here to do something fun? If all the answers to that are yes, then that's great. But if you're still unsure, you either need to seek more information or it just may not be worth applying.
Absolutely.
We don't have on this slide to take notes, but a tip that I hear again and again from our admissions consultants and application consultants is to make sure you take notes after you visit these schools. While your first impressions are fresh, and you can look back on those when you're actually applying. You can bring things up in your essays that you saw on campus, things like that. It's a really valuable thing to do.
Yeah.
All right, virtual college tours.
So during the pandemic, a lot of schools had to get really creative about this. And they often would have like a video, or you could like actually poke around and it would kind of take you like Google Maps style through the campus. Speaking of our friend, again, I don't want to mention names, but Tulane. I love Tulane. I applied to Tulane. But anyway, they would actually walk around campus with an iPad and go, look over here, this is this, and look over here, this is that. I'm not sure if they're still doing that, but all that to say, these are great because I one time it was a very weird story, but this mom, during one of my visits in Northern Virginia, like she chewed me out and said how horrible her visit to Vanderbilt was, which I had nothing to do with it. But she said, we spent $3,000, and that really like stuck with me because think about time off work, airfare, little brothers coming along, meals out. Oh, we got to go see, that museum, like all that stuff. So I realized it can take a lot of time, money, and treasure and sanity to go to these places. So that's why it's good to go to local. If you're like me, I don't want to stay here. I want to go somewhere else. Going to places locally, they're easy to get to. That can often inform the rest of your list. So if you're like, I like this place, it's like this. What are things that you got? I'm looking for something in California. We can work with that. Great.
And And then very much the same about what we talked about with virtual tours as normal in-person tours, but plan ahead, make sure you're taking notes, attend the sessions that are available, and then, compare and contrast among the other schools that you're taking virtual tours at or in-person tours. All right, Q&A. So if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll get through as many as we can. We have a question here, a little bit unrelated to tours, but is a question that is one we get quite a bit, so we'll answer. You take the SAT a couple times. Should you submit all your scores or just the highest score?
So I will say this. The colleges, you have to look at it this way. The colleges are looking to build their profile, so they're greedy. So basically, whatever score makes you look the best makes them look the best. So that's what they'll use to evaluate your file. Even if that's a super score, they couldn't care less if it was one sitting or if you took it over two, multiple sittings. But basically, you don't necessarily have to submit all your scores, but I would submit the ones that give you that best super score. So basically they take the highest of the two subsections, and what you would want them to do, like consider this section and this section and put those together. That's exactly what they're going to do. So all that to say, that's something you can work with your counselor. Even if you have a lower score that you submit for whatever reason, they're not going to go, well, what about that day? They're always going to look at your highest score because that's what they'll use to evaluate your file, and they couldn't care less about the other stuff. So,
all right.
Yeah.
So we have a couple minutes to answer another question or two, so feel free to pop those in. But as we wrap up, Dominique, Dr. Nick, anything else that we didn't cover today or didn't get to talk about in depth that you think is really important to highlight about college tours?
I mean, I would just say something that I found really funny as a tour guide. So usually the presentation, the info session, which is on my admissions officer typically, they're going to give you an hour presentation, then you go on an hour and a half tour. And on the hour and a half tour, it's 10 in the morning, right? So unlike the brochures where everyone's out on the lawn and frisbee and guitar and having the best day of their life, parents will always go, where are all the students? And I go, it's 10 a.m. They're either in class or asleep, hopefully not both. And the same thing when it would rain or something, they'd go, does it rain and snow, sleet, hail, firestorm, mudslide every day? No, just like where you live, the weather changes unless you live in San Diego. So all that to say, it's not going to be the brochure all the time. So when it would rain, it'd say, you found our secret. It's not always sunny here. And it's a big, beautiful day the rest of the time. So just keep that in mind.
All right. And then very quickly, what are a couple questions students and families should ask college reps when they come to visit their high school?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, I always ask what type of student would fit in, what type of student would not fit in. What's your favorite thing? What would you change? And lastly, what are you doing to prepare students for the next step? That's why I always ask.
And then do either of you have any tips for finding college open houses that are on the weekends? Because it does look like, because a lot of them have them during the week when it's harder to go during a school day.
This all depends on your high school. Some high schools, public and private, will say, we'll give you 5 excused absences to go look at colleges. Oftentimes, you just have to take the time off. That kind of depends on your high school policy. I can tell you at Vanderbilt and Penn, we had weekend sessions, but other places may not. It just kind of depends. So that's where you just have to look at what your high school's policy is, and then also what colleges you want to go and what offerings they have. But there are things you can do that aren't scheduled, as we talked about, the virtual tour. You can talk to a student, after hours like that. That works too.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have today. If you have more questions, feel free to send us an email, fill out the form on our website, and we can answer your questions and talk about how we can help you plan your college tours, apply, all of that. I want to say thank you to Dominique and Dr. Nick for joining us today and for all of this information. I feel like we packed a ton in, and we will send